What are the issues preventing National, ACT and New Zealand First from striking a coalition deal? And when, pray tell, will the three leaders get back in the same room and get this thing done? ACT leader David Seymour is here alongside the Greens MP Chloe Swarbrick. Morena, good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Good to see you. David, I mean, what do we even ask you at this point? Because it's been 17 days. First of all, what are the three issues that it's come down to?
I know that you'd love me to answer that, but I also know that you know we've said throughout this that we're not going to negotiate through media. So while appreciating that people are getting pretty tired of the length of time it's taking, we've also said that we're going to keep each other's confidence, be respectful, and make sure that we get a good deal. And let me just put this in a bit of perspective. We're going to have a government for 3 years that is going to take on some enormous challenges left by our predecessor. Now, people can argue, you know, I don't think in 2 years' time they're going to be grateful that we got the deal done today or Wednesday or Friday. What people will judge us on is, can we clean up the economy, the amount of crime, the amount of social division? Those are the real issues.
As soon as you announce the deal, everyone will immediately forget how long it took to sign. But seeing as we're not there yet, it's very much in a wait and see.
Well, I'm not assuming that. I think it is important that we move as rapidly as possible. But I also think we are, and I'll just make another point. You know, this is three parties coming together in a coalition government. Now, that hasn't been done before. We've had two parties in a coalition with another party sitting off to the side. We've brought together three who were competitors, sometimes fierce competitors.
So you're all going to be in coalition with one another?
Well, that's certainly been the goal of the negotiations.
Right,
No one's tried that before.
No.
So fierce competitors during the election, constructive cooperators in a cabinet, that's quite a transition.
That means you're all full members of cabinet sitting around from one another, no houses, half in, half out.
I think that's what, you know, in public statements of all three parties have said that they'd like to do that.
Right.
So if you start out with that as your goal of negotiation...
that's more no wonder it's taking so long, because you've got collective cabinet responsibility, don't you, that you're all bound by. And you're going to be sitting there next to Winston Peters, singing from the same song sheet on everything.
Been sitting next to Winston Peters quite a lot in the last few weeks, and people might be surprised. But look, I think we are ultimately going to have a very cooperative government that is going to do a good job at solving the, you know, just remember, I mean, we often forget how this started. People voted for change because the last 6 years have been, frankly, disastrous on almost every front.
Chloe, how do you think that's going to go? Because obviously there's collective cabinet responsibility and there's no out clause, right? Like normally if you're outside cabinet, you have the right to sort of disagree on other issues and all that kind of stuff. This is going to be everyone kumbaya inside the tent.
Well, I'm glad to see that David's now versed in the differences between confidence and supply and the cooperation agreement that the Greens held and keeping our distance from some of the decisions that the Labour Party made over the last 6 years, which on this couch he's blamed us for, but nonetheless. I do think that we just need to get on with the work, to be frank. We have a climate crisis and an inequality crisis, which New Zealanders feel profoundly every single day. So I'm interested by some of the soundings that we've heard from our incoming Prime Minister, but a little bit gutted, to be honest, in the context of particularly the recent unfolding disaster in Gaza, that we haven't yet seen the leadership, as I believe all political party leaders have a moral impetus to stand up for.
Do you have any idea at this stage when the talks might end, or, I mean, is there...
Oh, look, it could happen any day.
Okay.
You know, we are at a very advanced stage.
Okay. Let's talk about Gaza. What did you make, Chloe, of Labour coming out, the Labour leader coming out and saying, even though he's caretaker Prime Minister, calling for a ceasefire, which is out of step with what National has been saying and the caretaker government itself has been saying?
It's about time. I mean, look, in the course of the time that we'll be sitting on this couch for this panel, approximately 10 minutes or so, 2 Palestinians will die. One of them will be a child. We have a civilian population, which is approximately half the population of Aotearoa, New Zealand, crammed into a geographical area, which is a third the size of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and they are being systematically carpet bombed. You have, you know, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, organs of the United Nations who are calling this ethnic cleansing, a genocide, and just abhorrent beyond all measure of humanity. It is incumbent on all political leaders in this country to stand up to the plate and to say that they call for a ceasefire, a return of hostages, and actually, I would say, for the incoming government to recognise the statehood of Palestinians.
Okay, you mentioned the hostages. You would, of course, call on Hamas to release the hostages.
Of course, absolutely,
and
without doubt.
Can you understand why Israel is hesitant to do that without the hostages being released?
Yeah, I got to say, look, again, this is all being negotiated by the Qatari government at present. But the other point I would make, Ryan, is that based on reports out of actually some of the Jewish families themselves who have been involved in this atrocity, who have had family members abducted, they have been actually really upset by the actions of the Israeli government and some of the reported actions from Benjamin Netanyahu, who apparently has not been prioritising the release of those hostages.
Yeah, they have. Some families have some concerns around that, no doubt about that. But I suppose, I mean, it's all very well for us to sit on this couch over here and try and understand the intricacies of both sides of this.
I do have to say though, Ryan, I mean, look, you only need to look at the response of politicians in this country on the issue of Ukraine, for example. You only need to look at the position, for example, of the ACT Party in calling for the expulsion of the Iranian ambassador and calling for the expulsion of the Ukrainian ambassador.
It's a point that's been made many times online. How do you differentiate these two conflicts, and why is your stance somewhat different on both?
Well, it's not different at all. We, in all three cases, while the circumstances are quite different, have been clear that humanitarian needs come first, and then we get into the detail of what has actually happened. Now, without traversing Russia, Ukraine and Iran, which we could do, but we took positions on those given the circumstances at the time. In this circumstance, let's just remember how it all started, because that's been forgotten. Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, was the aggressor, went into Israel, they raped, murdered and took hostage hundreds of people. They have still got those hostages. Israel is defending itself.
Yes, but
how many more rockets were they supposed to allow to go over the border before they started defending themselves?
I guess the problem is you've got to look at what's in front of you here and now, don't you? And I agree. It was Hamas that started this particular conflict.
And it's Hamas that continues it, because it is Hamas that holds the hostages.
But that doesn't give Israel carte blanche to just respond in any way it wants, does it?
And that's not what they're doing either. You know, there's an incredible double standard here. If any other country was attacked the way that Israel has been attacked, I think the world would be saying, yes, this is terrible, but actually the right thing to do is for the other guys to release the hostages and stop attacking Israel. In this case, somehow Israel is at fault, and the calls are for the Israeli ambassador to be expelled. I'm sorry, but that is completely wrong.
No, I am absolutely sorry, because I cannot let that stand. I mean, you have the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, you have agencies and organs of the United Nations, you have Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, international lawyers across the globe that are saying that this did not start with October 7th. Absolutely, we abhor the abhorrent actions undertaken on October 7th.
Yeah.
But this started
it's a longer
75 years ago, when 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homeland. They now are pushed into areas where there are border walls around them, and they are not able to engage in the same level of just even being day-to-day citizens.
Totally.
They live under laws which are effectively apartheid.
I think what David's referring to is this particular phase of the conflict. As you said, it has been running for many decades.
And look, and they too are victims. I mean, I feel for the Palestinian people, but they too are victims of Hamas. This is a terrorist organisation. This is an organisation that mixes up humanitarian and civilian activities with terrorist activities. Now, the right answer is for Hamas to release the terrorists first and foremost, and stop terrorising their own people and stop terrorising people in Israel. If that happens, then we are okay.
Do you want Hamas, the military wing of Hamas, to be destroyed?
Terrorism should not exist.
Right. So you want them gone.
Really crystal clear here, because I don't think that this question has been put to David anywhere near forthrightly enough by media. David, do you call for a ceasefire?
I call for the hostages to be released.
Do you call for a ceasefire, David? If
the hostages are released, then maybe you can have a ceasefire.
Are you willing to call for recognition of Palestinian statehood?
No, I'm responsible. I'm calling for a two-state solution,
which requires acknowledging and accepting that Palestine exists.
Yes, and that means that, of course, it means Palestine exists.
So will you support a motion to acknowledge Palestinian statehood in our parliament?
not while Hamas are running it, because at the moment
this is the problem you get. I mean, I understand.
This is the perpetual feedback loop. Hamas was originally supported by the Israeli government in order to keep under suppression the Palestinian people. Again, we need some historical context, and I think that it's incumbent on our political leaders to stand up to the plate to call for that ceasefire. Because, David, what you're currently practicing is whataboutism. Well, 12,000 innocent civilians have died.
Chloe, I'm not sure you're on the moral high ground on this issue, to be quite honest.
I do think, Chloe, you can raise your voice and shout. I don't think anyone sitting on this couch...
I don't think I was shouting. It's very patronizing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to say you were shouting, but I don't think anyone on this couch wants to see what's going on in Gaza right now happening.
Of course not.
Anyone wants to perpetuate that.
The two of us on this couch, Ryan, hold positions of privilege and power in our parliament. One of us is a major leader of an incoming government. We have the opportunity to join with other international leaders and use every ounce of political power that we have to facilitate that call for ceasefire and ultimately to facilitate that two-state solution, which requires recognising Palestine.
And your call for ceasefire is regardless of whether any hostages are handed back or not?
If we have that ceasefire and the end to the abhorrence which is currently being rained down on civilians...
But do you call for a ceasefire even if the hostages are not returned?
Both have to happen simultaneously, Ryan.
Right, so
now,
then you both have the same position.
No, we do not, because a ceasefire results in the end of unnecessary suffering and deaths of Palestinians.
I think that this is a very complex issue, and frankly, there's been far too much politics played over it. We need to first of all recognise the humanity, then recognise the complexity, and then speak calmly for a solution.
All right.
Which is a ceasefire.
We have to leave this here, I'm afraid, because we are running up into our news. But thank you both so much for coming on. As always, I really appreciate it. ACT Leader David Seymour and Green MP Chloe Swarbrick.